Marguerite had not lost a single one of Chauvelin's words of command. For the moment she could do nothing but follow the soldiers and Chauvelin. She feared to lose her way, or she would have rushed forward and found that wooden hut, and perhaps been in time to warn the fugitives and their brave deliverer yet. Not 200 meters ahead was the edge of the cliff, and below, stretching far away to free and happy England, the sea rolled on smoothly and peaceably. Marguerite's gaze rested for an instant on the brilliant, silvery waters. Not 3 miles away, with white sails set, a graceful schooner lay in wait. Marguerite had guessed, rather than recognized her. It was the Daydream, Percy's favourite yacht. She waited there, out at sea, waited for her master like a beautiful white bird all ready to take flight, and he would never reach her, never see her smooth deck again, never gaze any more on the white cliffs of England, the land of liberty and of hope. The sight of the schooner seemed to infuse into the poor wearied woman the superhuman strength of despair. There was the edge of the cliff, and some way below was the hut, where presently her husband would meet his death. But the moon was out. She could see her way now. She could see the hut from a distance, run to it, rouse them all, warn them at any rate to be prepared and to sell their lives dearly, rather than be caught like so many rats in a hole. She could not gauge how distant the hut was, but without hesitation she began the steep descent, creeping from boulder to boulder, caring nothing for the soldiers, who evidently had all taken cover since the tall Englishman had not yet appeared. On she pressed, running, stumbling, footsore, half-dazed, but still on, when suddenly a crevice or stone or slippery bit of rock threw her violently to the ground. She struggled again to her feet and started running forward once more to give them that timely warning, to beg them to flee before he came, and to tell him to keep away, away from this death trap, away from this awful doom. But now she realized that other steps, quicker than her own, were already close at her heels. The next instant a hand dragged at her skirt and she was down on her knees again, while something was wound round her mouth to prevent her uttering a scream. Bewildered, half frantic with the bitterness of disappointment, she looked around her, helplessly, and bending down quite close to her, she saw through the mist, which seemed to gather round her, a pair of keen, malicious eyes, which appeared to her excited brain to have a weird, supernatural green light in them. "Dear me, he whispered with affected gallantry. "This is indeed a charming surprise." And Marguerite felt her resistless hand raised to Chauvelin's thin, mocking lips. Chauvelin must have given some directions, which she was too dazed to hear, for she felt herself lifted from off her feet. The bandage round her mouth was made more secure, and a pair of strong arms carried her on ahead. She had lost all notion of time and space, and for a few seconds, tired nature, mercifully, deprived her of consciousness. When she once more realized her state, she felt that she was placed with some degree of comfort upon a man's coat with her back resting against a fragment of rock. That the end of the journey had been reached, she gathered from the fact that she heard rapid questions and answers spoken in a whisper quite close to her. "There are 4 men in there, citoyen. They are sitting by the fire and seem to be waiting quietly. The hour, nearly 2 o'clock. Have the men taken cover?" "Yes, citoyen." "They will not blunder?" "They will not stir until the tall Englishman comes, then they will surround and overpower the 5 men." "Right. And the lady?" "Still dazed, I fancy. She's close beside you, citoyen." "And the Jew?" "He's gagged and his legs strapped together. He cannot move or scream." "Good. Then have your gun ready in case you want it. Get close to the hut and leave me to look after the lady." Degas evidently obeyed, for Marguerite heard him creeping away along the stony cliff. Then she felt that a pair of warm, thin, talon-like hands took hold of both her own and held them in a grip of steel. "Before that handkerchief is removed from your pretty mouth, fair lady," whispered Chauvelin close to her ear, "I think it right to give you one small word of warning. If you scream, nay, if you utter one sound, or attempt to move from here, my men, there are 30 of them about, will seize Saint-Just, de Tournay, and their 2 friends, and shoot them here, by my orders, before your eyes." Marguerite had listened to her implacable enemy's speech with ever-increasing terror. Chauvelin removed the handkerchief from her mouth. Why did she not, with unearthly screams that would re-echo from one end of the lonely beach to the other, send out a warning? Once or twice the screams rose in her throat, as if by instinct. Then, before her eyes, there stood the awful alternative. The brother and those 3 men shot before her eyes, practically by her orders. She, their murderer. Wait. 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 How long? The early morning hours sped on, and yet it was not dawn. The sea continued its incessant, mournful murmur. The autumnal breeze sighed gently in the night. The lonely beach was silent, even as the grave. Suddenly, from somewhere not very far away, a cheerful, strong voice was heard singing, "God save the King." Marguerite's aching heart stood still. She felt, more than she heard, the men on the watch preparing for the fight. Her senses told her that each, with sword in hand, was crouching, ready for the spring. Marguerite, as she heard, felt that her very life was slipping away, as if when that voice drew nearer, when the singer became entrapped. She distinctly heard the click of Degas' gun close to her. No, 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 no. Oh God in heaven, this cannot be. Let Armand's blood then be upon her own head. Let her be branded as his murderer. Let even he whom she loved despise and loathe her for this. But God, oh God, save him at any cost. With a wild shriek, she sprang to her feet and darted round the rock, against which she had been cowering. She saw a little red gleam through the chinks of the hut. She ran up to it and fell against its wooden walls, which she began to hammer with clenched fists in an almost maniacal frenzy, while she shouted, "Armand! Armand, for God's sake, fire! Your leader is near! He is coming! He is betrayed! Armand! Armand, fire in heaven's name!" She was seized and thrown to the ground. She lay there moaning, bruised, not caring, but still half sobbing, half shrieking, "Percy, my husband, for God's sake, fly! Armand! Armand, why don't you fire?" "One of you stop that woman screaming," hissed Chauvelin, who hardly could refrain from striking her. Something was thrown over her face. She could not breathe, and perforce she was silent. The bold singer, too, had become silent, warned, no doubt, of his impending danger by Marguerite's frantic shrieks. Chauvelin, with a muttered oath, which boded no good to her who had dared to upset his most cherished plans, had hastily shouted the word of command. "Into it, my men! And let no one escape from that hut alive!" The door was partially open. One of the soldiers pushed it farther, but within all was darkness, the charcoal fire only lighting with a dim red light the farthest corner of the hut. The soldiers paused automatically at the door, like machines, waiting for further orders. Chauvelin, who was prepared for a violent onslaught from within and for a vigorous resistance from the 4 fugitives under cover of the darkness, was for the moment paralyzed with astonishment when he saw the soldiers there at attention, like sentries on guard, whilst not a sound proceeded from the hut. Filled with a strange, anxious foreboding, he too went to the door of the hut, and peering into the gloom, he asked quickly, "What is the meaning of this?" "I think, citoyen, that there is no one there now," replied one of the soldiers, imperturbably. "You have not let those 4 men go?" thundered Chauvelin menacingly. "I ordered you to let no man escape alive." "You ordered us to wait, citoyen, until the tall Englishman arrived and joined the 4 men in the hut. No one came," said the sergeant sullenly. "But I ordered you just now, when the woman screamed, to rush in and let no one escape." "But, citoyen, the 4 men who were there before had been gone some time, I think." "You think? You?" said Chauvelin, almost choking with fury. "And you let them go?" "You ordered us to wait, citoyen," protested the sergeant, "and to implicitly obey your commands on pain of death. We waited. I heard the men creep out of the hut,
Not many minutes after we took cover, long before the woman screamed," he added, as Chauvelin seemed still quite speechless with rage. "Which way did they go?" asked Chauvelin, finally. "Oh, could not tell, citoyen," said the sergeant. "They went straight down the cliff first, and they disappeared behind some boulders."
"Hush!" What was that? All three men listened attentively. In the far, very far distance could be heard, faintly echoing and already dying away, the quick, sharp splash of half a dozen oars. Chauvelin took out his handkerchief and wiped the perspiration from his forehead. "The schooner's boat," was all he gasped. Evidently Armand St-Just and his three companions had managed to creep along the side of the cliffs, whilst the men, like true soldiers of the well-drilled Republican army, had with blind obedience and in fear of their lives implicitly obeyed Chauvelin's orders to wait for the tall Englishman, who was the important capture. They had no doubt reached one of the creeks which jut far out to sea on this coast at intervals. Behind this, the boat of the Daydream must have been on the lookout for them, and they were by now safely on board the British schooner. As if to confirm this last supposition, the dull boom of a gun was heard from out at sea. "The schooner, citoyen," said Degas quietly. "She's off." It needed all Chauvelin's nerve and presence of mind not to give way to a useless and undignified access of rage. "Bring the light in here," he commanded, as he once more entered the hut. The sergeant brought his lantern, and together the two men explored the little place. In a corner was a crumpled piece of paper, evidently forgotten there by the fugitives in their hurry to get away. The sergeant, much awed by the citoyen's obvious rage and impatience, picked the paper up and handed it respectfully to Chauvelin. "Read it, sergeant," said the latter curtly. "It's almost illegible, citoyen. A fearful scrawl." "I ordered you to read it," repeated Chauvelin viciously. The sergeant, by the light of his lantern, began deciphering the few hastily scrawled words. "I cannot quite reach you without risking your lives and endangering the success of your rescue. When you receive this, wait 2 minutes, then creep out of the hut one by one, turn to your left sharply and creep cautiously down the cliff. Keep to the left all the time, till you reach the first rock which you see jutting far out to sea. Behind it, in the creek, the boat is on the lookout for you. Give a long, sharp whistle. She will come up, get into her, my men will row you to the schooner and thence to England and safety. Once on board the Daydream, send the boat back for me, tell my men that I shall be at the creek which is in a direct line opposite the Chat Gris near Calais. They know it. I shall be there as soon as possible. They must wait for me at a safe distance out to sea till they hear the usual signal. Do not delay, and obey these instructions implicitly. Then there's the signature, citoyen," added the sergeant, as he handed the paper back to Chauvelin. But the latter had not waited an instant. "Which of you knows this coast well?" he shouted to his men, who now, one by one, had all returned from their fruitless run, and were all assembled once more round the hut. "I do, citoyen," said one of them. "I was born in Calais. I know every stone of these cliffs." "There is a creek in a direct line from the Chat Gris?" "There is, citoyen. I know it well." "The Englishman is hoping to reach that creek. He does not know every stone of these cliffs. He may go there by the longest way round. In any case, he will proceed cautiously for fear of the patrols. At any rate, there is a chance to get him yet. 1,000 francs to each man who gets to that creek before that long-legged Englishman." "I know a shortcut across the cliffs," said the soldier, and with an enthusiastic shout he rushed forward, followed closely by his comrades.